So welcome everybody. Welcome to BELMAS. I'm Dr. Victoria Shawummi, and I'm the conference chair for BELMAS. In my day job, I'm associate professor at University College London. However, let's leave that to one side. So I'm really putting on a big welcome for you to be here. I will hand over to my chair in the present moment, but I just want to tell you a little bit about BELMAS. BELMAS is celebrating its 50th year, can you imagine? And it's an anniversary year. So we've had a whole range of events happening from January 2021 right up to December 2021 as well. And this is one of them. And we're so excited about today because, again, this is our October. We've had 2 different events in October, and we've got some more to come on, which I'll tell you about later on. BELMAS is an association which has been around, as I said, 50 years, and it really celebrates what it is for educational leadership and management. And we look at that across sectors. So whether it's to do with schools, further education, higher education, or any other aspect of education which want to be involved with BELMAS. It is very international. It's located in the United Kingdom, but it is very international. And we're building up more and more internationalism. So please, if you feel it's something you'd like to be involved with, I'll tell you a bit more later on. But without further ado, I'm going to pass you on to Professor Elizabeth Riley, and she will take us through how we're going to do the actual session. But before that, what you'll notice is that you won't be able to kind of engage and kind of put your hand up and things like that because it's a webinar, but we can see you. And I'm sure that we can actually interact with you at some stage. All right, over to Elizabeth. Elizabeth.
Welcome to all of my esteemed colleagues and to all of those of you who are watching us this morning. It's my pleasure to chair our fireside chat. We just need a fire, which I've got one in the background here because it is the crack of dawn here in California in the United States. But welcome to each of you. I'd like to begin by inviting my colleagues to talk a bit about their background, some of the countries they work in, and what their reasons are for working with women in leadership. I'll briefly describe some of my own work. I began working in the Soviet Union during the collapse back in the late 80s, early 90s. And once I entered higher education full-time, I started with studies in India and China. And some of the work for which I'm better known is in Afghanistan, which is where I presently have another study that I'm beginning, but not boots on the ground because of the danger situation there. Why do I do this? There's an important Rumi quote that influenced me, and that is that Rumi talked about how there are people going back and forth across doorways, and it's round and open, and we should not go back to sleep. And so when doors have opened in my life, I've chosen to walk through them, and opportunities have arisen to be able to talk to women about their experiences in leadership and to be able to share those stories on a stage such as this. So that's why I do the work we do. Rachel, good morning and good afternoon or good evening and welcome.
Good morning, everybody. It's relatively early in New Zealand and such a wonderful opportunity to be part of this wonderful conversation. I work in the University of Waikato in Hamilton, New Zealand, and my role as the director of the Centre for Educational Leadership is to sort of traverse that research world and sort of bring that nexus to our teaching in our master's program. I began studying women in leadership primarily through a loaded invitation, really, where a school invited me in to work with a group of young women to fix them, to teach them how to be better leaders. And I went in full of definitions and worksheets of all the things that I thought were important, of which it dawned on me that these women didn't really need that kind of stuff that had no relevance to their lives. So I really reshaped the way in which I saw leadership, and it was the stepping stone for me into this work and this research. I study in this area because although I'm smiling, I'm actually really worried. I'm worried for young women, and I'm worried about the ways in which schools present leadership to them. I'm worried about the ways in which schools categorize them and judge them and exclude them. and from leadership opportunities. And I see significant failings in our school system with regard to preparing young women for leadership. I can see that in the work that they do, that they're not necessarily valued. The things that they bring to schools are overlooked. And in that first part of my work, I was really heartbroken to see that many of these young women did not confidently see themselves in their worlds, let alone in the leadership landscape. So that's really transported me into academia and into the work that I do. Work with amazing people, and perhaps my journey started with one of our original cohort from the WLE group, the Women Leading Education group, Jane Strachan, where I got to work in Vanuatu with her, looking at culturally responsive leadership. I work with Indigenous communities in New Zealand and part of a number of international projects across the UK, the US, Scotland and Jamaica. So my journey in this area continues, and I'm still worried. I'm deeply concerned, and that worry traverses into other contexts. So we can talk about those as the conversation goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Rosangela, greetings.
Oh my God. Good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon for you. Thank you so much for this invitation. I am really happy to be here, to meet some people that I met before, Professor Victoria Shromi, Professor Rachel McNee, and Professor Elizabeth Rayleigh, and my first meeting with Professor Juliet, and also Afifa. My background starts in my family. My grandmother and my mother always told me to study a lot. So this is my first background. After this, in university, I did journalism, communication, and I became a Black activist of Black movement in Brazil. And I could meet some people, especially Black women, like Lélia Gonzalez, reading their articles. Lélia Gonzalez, Luisa Bairros, Beatriz do Nascimento, and I could learn more about racism and how it was important for Black women to be organized. So I started to work doing training to public teachers about education and also about how to be anti-racist in their lives. So in 2007, I received an invitation to present a paper in Rome, Italy. And there I could meet Professor Helen Soberhart, Professor Cheryl Shakes-Haft, Sharon Adams Taylors, and there we started a group, international group, Women Leading Education. After that, Professor Margaret Grogan and Victoria told me that I have to write and to publish. So it was a challenge because my first language is Portuguese. Also, Professor Elizabeth Rayleigh was editor in a book, and I wrote an article talking about Brazil. We are a huge country, rich country, but we have a lot of problems, inequalities, and it's necessary to build democratic ways to have people rights, for people access their rights. So it is not easy, but what has been possible, in my opinion, leadership is not only in my opinion, it's also one fact. Leadership is not a concept that we can find in education courses here in Brazil. So it's important to explain that even though Paulo Freire's thoughts prioritizing the dialogue as a pedagogical method to autonomy development, in Brazil, the concept of leadership is not regularly employed in education courses, but often appears in theology, business, administration. So when I had this experience, when I met these powerful women from different countries, I started to think what could be leadership in my reality. So I really know that we have powerful women, powerful Black women here, but how could us define their work inside education courses? It has been possible to understand that most of leaders are in non-formal education. They are anonymous women. They, in general, work, support their families and also helping people. Nowadays in the university, my students start to define leadership. So I hope to share here some of our thoughts about how define leadership.
Thank you,
in this
Rosangela.
situation.
We'll come back to you in just a few minutes. Afifa, Dr. Afifa.
Thank you very much. First, I will thank everybody to give me this opportunity. I have been working from the last 28 years, from the kindergarten education to the university, and have a long administrative and teaching experience. But now currently I am working as a coordinator, PhD coordinator. I think why I am studying leadership, because I am immersed in the idea that women can make a greater change. Why? Because they are the caretakers of their families, and thus they play a very important role for their community, and they may play a significant role for their institutions. So that's great how I give importance to women leadership. And I have studied in some Asian countries also. These are, excuse me, the azan is going on, so it can interfere. But I was saying that I have worked in urban, suburban, in the city areas of Pakistan, and I have seen a number of women taking challenges to make changes to their environment and for working for young ladies. And side by side, they are struggling for their families and the other responsibilities they have. So it is important to listen to everybody, how she has approached to this level of leadership. And I have studied in Malaysia and Thailand, and I visited also UK, and saw how women have some common challenges, and that they have some common constraints, whether they are in European countries or Asian countries, or they are somewhere else. They have some constraints. They may be personal, they may be from their environmental or institutional. So this was on my side, that I think that the women can make greater changes on compassionate grounds for their community. So they must be leaders. So how they can take place is our part of this discussion.
Thank you, Afifa. Sounds like we're getting the call to prayer also this morning in the background. Juliet, good welcome to you.
Good afternoon, good morning from South Africa, Johannesburg, where it's about 3:15 2 in the afternoon. Well, just to talk about my entry into women's leadership issues. In fact, it actually goes back to when I started my master's degree, and I had to write a dissertation, and I was totally at a loss as to what I should be studying. And in the module that I took, it was actually on postmodern feminisms. So that was my first official entry into academia and theories related to that. And within the discourse, I found a vocabulary for some of the experiences that I had been undergoing, and pretty much my colleagues, female colleagues. And so I wrote my master's dissertation on a postmodern critique of the English language text. And it was a really exciting, illuminating exercise in that I was able to see how women are misrepresented or diminished, and even visually, in terms of not just the English language and how they are portrayed through the language and the silences and the gaps, but also through the visuals that are actually in the textbooks. And it sensitized me to that and became very critically conscious and reflective about my own life, which I thought was pretty privileged, because I come from a home where both my mom and dad worked at the same business, and they would come home and pretty much share the household chores. So I thought that was normal until I kind of stepped out and started to see that this is not normal. And most recently, I've been doing some research into my family history. We won't have the time to talk about it now, but to see that, I was just looking at marriage certificates from my relatives, my aunts and my grandma, and to see that in the marriage certificate, they would write the groom's occupation, whether he was a chef or whatever it was. But the women, invariably, in all of their marriage certificates, there was just a stroke right through there, like they were non-existent, didn't have any careers, were not doing anything. And so it, as I look back over the history of this, I can just see how deeply entrenched the invisibility of women is. There is a lack of recognition of what they do. There's a lack of remuneration for what they do. And it pretty much, that patriarchal structure replicates itself in the school. And certainly in South Africa, and from the research we know internationally, education is a feminized profession. And those patriarchal tendencies and stereotypes and ways of being and doing things just perpetuates itself and replicates itself in the school system. And it's amazing. So I did my master's there, went on to do my PhD work. And in my PhD work, I had 5 incredible female professors, all of them high-ranking, extremely accomplished women. And they were teaching English from a feminist perspective. And so I was able to see how they use texts as well in order to teach against the grain and to celebrate and to make visible women's experiences. And all of them wrote autobiographical essays for me. So that is one of my data collection solicitation devices. And it was wonderful to see how they wrote, and also as conscious as they were about the language and the representation of themselves and their family. We went through a couple of iterations when they would ask actually to revise it because they were too afraid to offend family members, for how they had been treated as girl children, but also how their parents had also become complicit in this whole narrative and maybe the mechanism of silencing the girl child and women. And of course, thereafter, I went on to talk about and to study in my postdoctoral work on women leading education in disadvantaged contexts. And that's pretty much opened up an enormous gateway into women leading education in Africa. And so over the past 2 days, the 27th and the 28th, I just actually came out of hosting a conference on women, on education leadership in Africa. We had about 25 speakers we had speakers from 25 different countries. And I was so overjoyed to have women from Francophone countries who felt the barrier of not having to, linguistic barriers of not being able to communicate in English, and so also became self-censored in that way. So in terms of the countries that I've worked with, I've been blessed, I think, in the respect that I've supervised master's, PhD, honors level students from various countries across the African continent, notably South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Mauritius, Nigeria, Tanzania, Eswatini. The list is long, and also Rwanda with my postdoctoral research fellows. And I've also done some work with women, refugee women and women in leadership from refugee women in leadership. So it's helped me connect to not just women in leadership, but also to families from different countries that are seeking, people from different countries seeking refuge in South Africa, like Cameroon. So
Thank
I
you,
think that's
Juliet.
yeah.
We're going to need to, we'll come back to you because I'm afraid we're going to run out of time. Everyone's stories are so amazing. Victoria, Victoria, if you could give us a brief introduction about yourself and then begin addressing our second question, which is, what are some of our emerging understandings about women in leadership globally?
Yeah, okay. I'm very minimalist, so I can do it very, very fast. So with the first question, which you asked us a little bit about who you are and how you became a leader, I would say that I became a leader from a very young age. I was very much involved with leadership in the village. And so I grew up in a village with German Jewish parents, which some of you know anyway. And we had a big house, and I was very interested in bringing the children into the house, people in the village into the house. And I organized youth activities from the age of about 5. And that was, I would say, my starting aspect of leadership. I've always been interested in leadership. I've been very interested in women and leadership. And when I came to London, I kind of thought that leadership and women was about women as it stands. However, I very quickly learned from living in a very white area and coming into London that the discussion around Black leadership and Black female leadership is very different. So I've been over the years very interested in, my research has touched on and developed in the voices of Black women to ensure that the visibility of Black women in leadership is actually there, because we do have different experiences. Now, I won't say too much more about that. Hopefully that gives you a little taster. Now, moving on to the second question, which is what are emerging understandings about women in leadership globally? Well, I think I started to touch on that. So for me, I think it's really understanding what it is to be a woman who's leading, who also looks like me, or if they don't look like me, they're not white. And what does that bring? What does that bring to the table? So I think globally, because like many of you, I've done my work internationally, and everybody around here, I've been to all those different countries and I love it. So I would say some of the things are, there are so many similarities to what we do as women. Some of the things we have to deal with, whether you're a woman as a leader who has parental responsibilities, childcare responsibilities, or your own responsibilities as you as an individual, we have to deal with that. But also the perception of you as a woman in a leadership role. There's always pushback. Pushback because you're not the type of woman or the type of leader they want, or because of the biases and the stereotypes which go with being a woman. And I think globally, when I think about Brazil, and I was doing work in the actual communities, suburb communities, that was very powerful. I was doing that for a couple of years, and I was meant to go back last year, and of course I couldn't, so I'm hoping it'd be next year. That in itself was very powerful, and how community feminism takes place in leadership, really powerful. So I could say more, but I'm not going to. I want to give the baton to the next person, which Elizabeth will name who it is. I hope that answers the first aspect of that question, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Victoria. It does address it. I'll just say briefly, and then I'd like to open the floor for the other women. One thing I noticed from my work throughout the world is that our similarities of what we face and what our emerging understandings are very similar, that gender remains an issue in any country where I work. And if you are a woman of color or an indigenous woman, that becomes an intersection with gender issues that can then affect one's progress and successes in global society. And so when I work across countries, I keep seeing the same issues emerge. And as Rachel shared earlier, I am concerned too about not just those of us who are in this profession at this point, but for the next generation. Other women have some thoughts on that issue. And let's watch the time because we would like to get to all of our questions today.
Yeah, I think you're right, Elizabeth. In terms of those similarities, I think that's it's a long story that's been told. And I remember a number of years ago feeling so frustrated when I entered this space of research, and I said to Cheryl Shakeshaft, you know, we're just doing the same stuff and finding out the same things all the time, and it just feels like we're not shifting the storyline. And I said, sometimes I feel my work isn't making a difference. And I remember her sitting me down and saying, actually, even though you're finding out the same things, that is in itself a finding. You're resurfacing and reaffirming this story so that it's not forgotten. And it's saying that nothing is changing. So that is really important. But I think what I took away from that too was these different stories across different contexts, and just how important it is to culturally locate these stories from women, their own narratives, so that women from those contexts can make sense of their own stories themselves. I think that's really critical.
Others of you like to chime in on that question of the enduring understandings or things we're noticing?
You might want to nominate.
Afifa, have some thoughts about that.
I was actually thinking about that. I got from my understanding and my researches or working with other women that in my country, more and more women are coming towards education and higher education. If you go in any university, you will see 60–70% girls are there. But as this phenomena goes across the world, when we talk about leadership, they have less opportunities. As we have this recent research by Gagliardi, that in 2017, only 30% women were in university presidents or university CEOs or provosts. And the women of color, just 5%. It means still we are here thinking about how we can excel in leadership. On the other side, as we have studied in different researches, men are just continuing the status quo, and or they are thinking for more of materialistic values or materialistic concerns, whereas women try to work for compassion, collaboration, and they want to work for making changes for community, for the betterment of community. And they have I have heard from my fellows also, they have projects for community betterment, and they have specifically worked for that. So my understanding of that, if there are some successful leaders, women leaders, they have struggled a lot, as well as with the patriotic challenges and with the family work balance challenges, and with the caretaking of their elders and their female role expectations, and the other side, they have worked hard in their institutions. For example, if I worked in, when I was taking my education and working with institutions, I worked, I think, twice of my male fellows. Why? Because they were not accepting me and not accepting my work as a woman. And I have to work harder to be accepted and to compete them. And I excelled. Most of the time excelled in all of my fellows, but still they were not ready to for my leadership or any leadership role. So I thought that if there are a lot of women in the society who are being the role models and who are working hard, eventually male members or male should, I think they have to accept their supremacy, or I don't mean by supremacy means they are better than them, but I think they are equal to them, or they must have some role or importance in the society. So I think leadership for women is a continuous struggle, and it's just a balance of their family life and their work, and they have some specific dedications for their to align their own interest with the institutional addresses or with the communal interests. For example, if they have broader visions about to make changes to the institutions and through institutions to the community, they can work better, they can work harder, and finally they will be accepted in the society.
Thank you, Afifa. Rosangela, perhaps you could piggyback on that and also lead into our third question, which is about challenges women are facing. And then after you speak, I'd love to hear from Juliet.
Okay. After here, Afifa, I am thinking that Brazil, we had 4 centuries and half of slavery period. So to now, since then to nowadays, women have built ways to access dignified life for themselves and their families. So Black feminism has been considered in my research option because it happens inside and outside universities. And non-formal education and community mobilization are strategic spaces where female leaders have created tools to support, develop, and help people. Most of them are women leading education without make self-definitions about this concept. When I started to think about women leadership in 2007, because I met the powerful women, as I told before, I looked my life and I could see that I was only the unique Black woman in that space. So when we start to travel, or when we start to go to spaces where only white people are, in some ways, you also learn the conceptions that were taught by them. So I really don't know if we can use the same concept of leadership here, because our reality is really different. So we were colonized. So how can we build a decolonized thought, new ways to share our knowledge? So for this reason, I like to learn with young women. The young women, they have always new challenges and new speeches to teach us. But in the same time, we need to know if we are open to hear them and to learn with them. In general, when we are inside universities, we learn the colonial way, and we think that we know everything, but leaders have to learn to listen and also don't speak for nobody. So this is a challenge. And here we had in 2015 a huge march, the Black Women March, for the good living and against violence. So here, violence, femicide happens every day. So when we are talking in this moment about leadership, We need to think how to keep lives. Black lives matter, women's lives matter, children's lives matter. In the poor communities in the city where I work, Rio de Janeiro, every day children are shot because the state go to that place to arrest drug dealers. But always we have children dying, women dying. Until now, we don't know who killed Marielle Franco. She was a politician. So every day we have violence. So the best thing, in my opinion, is when we are together and we can share our problems, and also we can hear about other countries, and maybe together we can try find some ways to build knowledge and exchange with people. But it's really important. We know that we cannot adopt the same conceptions for all the countries. We are really different.
Very important point, Rosangela. Juliet, would you like to pick that up?
Yes, I just wanted to talk about some of the emerging issues that I see as well. I think that it's been around, but there's a greater emphasis on intersectionality and recognizing that not all women are created equal, and that there are powers, privileges that some women enjoy, and others are still left to the margins. So I see intersectionality is coming to the fore, and just also women taking on leadership and the recognition that you don't have to have positional power, you don't have to have a title, but wherever it is you are able to make a difference, and you are able to agitate for social transformation. As well as recently we talked about in a paper that I presented about women shattering the glass ceiling. And certainly in higher education, I'm noticing more that women are able to ascend the ladder, and some of them even shatter the glass ceiling, but there's a labyrinth of several obstacles upon obstacles that they have to. So they do make progress, but at great emotional cost, at great physical costs and well-being. The other issue that was coming through in some of our research recently, especially work that we did during COVID, was the intensification of emotional and affective labor. And the affective is just about the emotional about how we manage our own emotions and constantly suppress it so that we can show up looking like we have it all together. But the affective is about just the greater extent to which we are called upon as women to be able to be there for friends and family, for aging parents, for sick family members. And I will just conclude with one example from one of my master's students who was taken out of school at the age of 11 because of religious restrictions. And she was, because Western education was thought to be bad, or education was thought to be bad for her. And she has very privately managed to come through all the other ranks, complete her school education, a university education. She's now enrolled for a master's. But when the pandemic hit, pretty much all of her family members were either contracted the virus, and it was her, she had to come to the fore in order to look after all of them. And currently her studies are in abeyance because she's still trying to deal with the physical onslaught of it, the emotional onslaught of it. And it's difficult for me to even reach out to her because I get the sense that her family doesn't know that she is actually studying right now. Thanks,
Thank you.
Elizabeth, yes.
Sure. Victoria, would you like to pick that up?
Yeah, which bit, Elizabeth? Sorry, I was just trying to look at the chats at the same time.
And let me just pause and say those of you who will be watching this later, we've got this amazing chat going on. So I encourage those of you who are participating with us, please do continue the chat. It's really brilliant. Victoria, if you could talk a bit more about challenges you see and then move into the successes. And then I'd like to invite Rachel to piggyback after you.
All right, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I also want to give a big shout out for Kay. Hi, Kay. Kay Fuller is part of our rig, and she's part of the gender rig. There's myself, there's Kay, there's Saida, and there's Ponso. So all of us are the ones who do the RIG, which is a research interest group for BELMAS. So I just wanted to say that. So Kay's writing in the actual chat there. And also Sharon Adams is there as well, and she's a key significant person with WLEs. I just wanted to put a shout out for her. In relation to challenges, just very quickly, I think I would like to say is that I mentioned some things already, but also when we talk about the glass ceiling, when we're talking about white women, well, for Black women, it's slightly different. It's concrete. It's completely and utterly concrete, meaning you can't see through the ceiling itself. And I think that's something which we do need to recognize. We have to recognize the emotional burden that Black women have as well. Kay and Elizabeth and Rachel and Rosangela, Afifa, I don't know, Juliet as well, know that one of the things I've always done throughout my research from undergrad onwards was to speak about intersectionality and how that in itself is such a challenge to be recognized as a woman and doing research. Because most of the time when people introduce me, say, yeah, this is Victoria, and she's doing work on race. And I quietly say, well, actually, I'm not an expert in race. My expertise is in gender, but they find that very difficult because what they see visually is somebody looking like me, but they don't put the two together. But anyway, so that's another aspect of the challenge. I also want to say successes in women in leadership. Well, one big success I think is really a good shout. And I'm going to say this because men would do that if they were sitting here. We've got a fantastic book which is coming out, which is on, and it's a handbook on Bloomsbury gender and educational leadership and management. That will be in the publishers, out in the shops, hopefully in February. We did that within the pandemic, and we got it to the publishers for the 31st of March. That is a success. That enables, we've got 27 women from across, and that's not just only on their own, they've got 27 chapters across the world in this book, and it's a first handbook on women in gender and women in leadership for what we're doing in educational leadership. So I think that's a success, and we do need to shout about that. In relation to success as well, I think I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass the baton over to Rachel, because I've said enough, and I think that's a start as well. Okay, Rachel.
I think, I'm so excited. I can't wait to see that book, Victoria. I think some of the challenges, I'm just going to go back to that, is the way in which we talk about leadership and how we use these metaphors of glass ceilings and concrete and juggling. Juggling is an example we use all the time, where women are juggling these multiple things. And we've got to be really careful, I think, about how we use these, in terms of juggling a family and juggling a job, both are two very precious things. And, why do we feel that we can throw one up in the air while we tend to at one, and then throw it up in the air and launch it while we catch the other on its way down? These things are precious. They are close to our hearts, are part of who we are and how we are as leaders. So how do we change the way we talk about things, where we can focus and have sustained attention and care and nurturing in different parts of our lives without feeling we have to throw things up and leave them and push them to the side? I think the way in which we language ourselves is a real challenge. And sometimes we're our own worst enemies when we describe things in particular ways, because then people expect that. They expect people to juggle. They expect people to put things up in the air and toss them aside. That'd be one thing as a challenge. I think for me as a success in this area of research is the ways in which we're providing opportunities to re-theorize leadership through the lenses of women, but also extending those lenses so that we are providing sense-making opportunities for a range of people, where we're drawing women from the margins into the center of this theorizing. I think that's a real success in the work that we do. And I know you're going to talk a little bit shortly, Victoria, probably about the Frontiers Special Edition, but how we represent the research, how we do things differently is a real success. So we're shifting the ways in which we inquire into women's lives, how we use different tools to do that. And I think that's really special. And I think another success that I feel absolutely privileged to be a part of is the sisterhood and the community that groups of researchers and women leaders are so good at creating. And they draw women in, they support women to create opportunities, they support women to make sense of their worlds and allow them to bring their full selves to research and to the table. When the table isn't big enough, they bring more chairs, they build a bigger table. It's not about exclusion, it's about sisterhood. And for me, that's been a real success.
Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. I would add that I think one of the successes I've noticed is not only the sisterhood, but the building of allies and advocates from men throughout the world. We have men who do research women in leadership. There are those of us who support our work. There are over a half dozen men supporting my work that is beginning once again in Afghanistan, although virtually. They are opening doors so that my co-PI, who is an executive with Amnesty International, she and I will be able to interview women who are experiencing challenges in education, in leadership, and in working in higher education right this moment. So that to me has been a success, is building the allyship outward as well. Other people like to add about successes before we move on to our next question.
I will say one of the important thing about success is that women leaders are by choice. They are ready to take challenges. The leaders I have talked in my country and the other Asian countries, they are leaders by choice. They wanted to work harder to change, to make some changes, positive changes. And they worked harder and they sacrificed most of the time for their physical, for their health, for your family, and sometimes for other social contracts, but they worked for making something important, making some important changes. So I think the women which have achieved a point, it's not necessary that they have been given a position. They are leaders without any position because they have made changes and they have motivated a number of people. For example, if I take myself, we have been, me and my team at our university, have been working for the doctoral program we have continued in our university. Most of the people were not agreed to do that, and except their different types of complaints, we try to continue it, and within these 3 or 4 years, we have attained a very good number of doctors, and each and every women doctor, women student, I think is capable of leading the community wherever she will go, schools and colleges and universities, and in the community, they will make change because they have seen all such kinds of activities that sometimes institutes and people are not supporting them. I'm talking about my own country and my own places, because and those women, they come from very hard situations. Some of them have some family problems, some have them some economic problems, and some of them just social taboos. There are my students who leave doctoral programs just because their the family-in-law is not allowing them to continue their studies. So we try to engage such people also, and we work hard for them. And if they have some hardship cases, we also, I myself and my team, we try to help those people to complete their studies and to go for a community to help them and to make their own positions better in their institutions. So it is a success. Without any position, more of the women without any position are working hard for making change in the community and for a better change. Alhamdulillah, in our country, one of the things is I want to mention that in Pakistan, there are most of the time in public sector, there are 2 streams. One is for female, schools are separate, colleges are separate, and some of the universities are women universities. So in if some female opt these institutions, they can avoid all other male and female tussle type situations, and they can just go as per their efforts and as per their struggles. And the last point is that women are not facing more problems in the institution, but out of institutions, because the social taboos and traditions are there, which do not allow women to come to institutions. This is what, once they come, they make something change. They make something.
Thank you, Afifa, and that's a great transition for us to think about our last question, which is the way forward. Rosangela, could you speak to that for a moment?
I was thinking that in 2007, I was a PhD researcher, and I received an invitation to organize a meeting in Brazil, and I answered, it's impossible. So 10 years later, 2017, I could organize the meeting, and we had 11 countries and women from different states traveling to Rio de Janeiro, to the Baixada Fluminense and Duque de Caxias City to talk about leadership. What happens? In 2017, 10 years later, I could really believe that, oh, okay, I am a leader, I will try to do something about this, but also the success was to convince students that they also were leaders. So in 2019, Professor Kay Fuller organized a beautiful conference in Nottingham. So we could travel, taking with us undergraduate students. So now, in 3 years later, these students are doing master, they are studying English, they want to be leaders, and they are studying other women. So the success is when we can be mentors, but also when we don't know about mentoring and we are open to learn. So I could learn that one day, maybe I will be the host, and this happened. So we are together here. This is a success. Different countries, we have a lot of problems, but in the same way, we have hope to find solutions.
Thank you, Rosangela. Juliet, some of your thoughts.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I was wanting to also talk about the successes and then into the way forward. And I think if I speak from the South African context, it's been our quest with the women that I work with to encourage them to unlearn the myths about their inabilities and their incapabilities, because they're already doing a great work and they're already shouldering a lot of the responsibilities both at home and at work. And I think the sooner we can get women to unlearn the myths that they are not cut out for leadership, they're not leadership material, that would go a long way in contributing to the successes. Recently, we've actually been able to apply for scholarships for women who are already employed at the university, but who are studying towards their PhD, to be able to contribute financially to their studies so that they can get some time out to complete their studies. From this program, we would have at least about 12 women graduating with PhDs. My prayer is that they will not be absorbed into, once again, nurturing and administrative posts that take away time from their work. I think about women telling their stories. The more stories we get out there from the various contexts and how women have navigated the obstacles, the barriers, and how they have been able to show up and to be their true authentic selves would be wonderful. The collaborations, I am so grateful for that. Today's event is testimony to just the wonderful power of us being able to meet and to talk and to share our stories. And once again, to also not to ostracize the men who want to reach out and to contribute to the agenda of social justice and women's participation, parity. And finally, for us not to forget from whence we came from. When women then ascend and come into positions of leadership and power, they do not replicate oppression. They do not then cut off the ladder from underneath so that other women cannot ascend and come up to where they are. So that sense of camaraderie, because we just don't want to have to promote women only for us to be oppressed by other women, I would think. Thank you.
Indeed, very important points about, you know, some people do ask us about leadership style of women. And one thing I've noticed is that sometimes we can take on characteristics that are very authoritarian, autocratic, non-communicative, almost oppressive or actually oppressive. And I've learned that from many of the women I've worked with globally, that sometimes as women rise up into higher level positions, they can be more miserable to work with than men, perhaps. So I would invite people to remain generous and remain, hold yourself in a way that allows us all to have a voice and to authentically become transformational leaders. Rachel, have you got some thoughts before we close off with Victoria?
I think probably just coming back to those original statements, and we look forward to where are we going, and where is the research agenda heading, and what actions are we personally taking? And Juliet, your points about women supporting women are really essential, and understanding the paths we've walked. I think it's also understanding where young women have a place in this conversation, and what work we're doing with them, so that they have the confidence and the ability to articulate their leadership understandings, and also challenge some of those situations that they might encounter later on. I think also for us as a group of researchers, if you're in the audience today, being really strategic about where we position our research is important, so that the people who need to read it, people who can access it. Not everyone has access to top journals. Not everyone can afford that. So how are we sharing our key messages with women, for women and for men, so that we can change systems, policies and processes? In this way, we can leverage off this knowledge and hopefully create some sustainable and deep and meaningful change.
So first of all, I want to say, I just want to answer the question myself in a couple of seconds. I think one of the things which links onto what Rachel's just said is about reaching out to the community and inviting the community to be with us. And I think that's the type of work which makes things happen. It makes things happen so it has a voice. If I had time, I'd tell you a little bit about what I was doing in Brazil, which made that happen around community and community leadership and what's happening with that. I think I'd like to just put out a small shout as well. I've already said about the book, which is coming out, but also we did a fantastic special edition, which was published by Frontiers, and Kay led that. It was, again, it was Kay, Ponsu and myself, which we did this Frontiers special edition, which have got a fantastic group of people. It was based on the conference which took place in Nottingham as well. And I mention those publications because that's how we get things out. That's how we also encourage each other to write from different perspectives. So Elizabeth, I just want to say thank you so much for chairing this particular armchair conversation, really, which has brought in people from across the world. So Elizabeth, I say thank you to you. Rachel, I say thank you for you from New Zealand. Rosangela from Brazil, I thank you for you. Afifa, I've known Afifa for quite a long time. That's also was based on a project, a big research project, which I did with my colleague Saida, who would be here, but she's not here today, which was looking at research for women in higher education. It was one of its first kind, and it opened up lots of doors. So FIFA, thank you to you. Juliet, thank you to you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Thank you very much for.
Oh, thank you, my darling. And thank you, Juliet, for you as well, for your experience and what you do in South Africa. So you can see we've got a fantastic group. Now, just to close up in relation to BELMAS. BELMAS, as you know, is an organization or an association which really is at the heart of educational leadership. And if you feel that you want a bit more of this, what you've just seen, why not? Why not look for a membership? Rachel, who is in the back office at the moment, working with us to make sure things are all sorted, has put it in the chat. So there's a link there to get to know a little bit more about BELMAS, and also if you want to sign up. And I believe that if you sign up, you've got the journal, which is there, and also we've got MIE, which is another one of our journals as well. So they're really good things to have. We'll also be doing another event which is taking place next week, and that's really aimed at doctoral students, and it's their experiences. And again, it's a worldwide one, it's international, and that's being led by Paul Campbell, and the person who's facing up that for us on the 10th of November is Ponsu, and Ponsu will do what I've done. She'll be the face of BELMAS and telling you all the different bits. So you'll start to see the different people. And Dr. Ponsu Moswe is based at Warwick University. So I think that's all I want to say, really. And I want to say thank you to the team of BELMAS, because without them, we would be lost trying to get this all sorted, being on webinar and all those types of things. So if you do have any questions which you want to raise at all, you can put them, and you can email them. Rachel, I don't know whether they email or what they do, but if you put something in the chat, I'm sure they can sort that out. And this is recorded. And so as it's recorded, it will be sent out in our BELMAS links on Twitter, etc. So do look out for it. Thank you again so much for your time today.